Thank you, folks, for coming for the last session of the day. Much appreciated. We're going to talk about tools that are available to us as security professionals. Tools that are not necessarily security by nature. And we're going to talk about SOAR as a concept, not a platform. SOARing towards continuous security, a SecOps and a threat responsive perspective. That's the title. I have to do it. Presenters are myself. I've been 10 plus years in the industry. I've done everything from a help desk, first level, second level support, helping lost souls on the phone, moving through the ops, configuring and provisioning data centers for a fintech. Moved recently into a cybersecurity. I have some dev background. Michael was supposed to be the other presenter. He actually did the legwork for that presentation. He just couldn't make it to the Ignite 2019, so I'll do the talk for his slides as well. Now, as a company, we faced a number of challenges. Like a month ago, I went to my panorama looking for a specific label. It was supposed to be prod label. I found prod with a capital prod, capital P, PRD. It was like 5 different ways of the same level. So obviously, repetitive tasks from different team members yield different results. To the best, it made us shadow ACLs, but to the worst, we couldn't really say for sure what is our security posture around our environments. You had to go actually in Panorama, find those duplicates, whether using a script, a Tufen, or something else, to actually find out what is your security posture. And it's not only that, but when we schedule a change at 12 o'clock midnight, and the guy does it, and we have to roll back in the morning because somebody found an issue, there's nobody else can roll it back. I have to wake up this guy that took a day off on the next day to do it. So, lack of automation. There's no really way of doing things better at that time. And then we went into the cloud, and everyone probably knows. How many of you are in Azure and AWS currently? Have like working a lot. So you know, guys, those virtual instances, they pop up like popcorns, right? And the ops team in the back doesn't really tell you that there's a new instance, and you have to secure it. So your firewall doesn't really know what's behind it. You have to teach it manually. There's no integration between it. Like your ACLs are like static. They don't pick up what's behind the firewall. So the automation and the integration lack actually made us look like a bottleneck, like losers in our team, because every time when there's a new application, for some reason the dev guy thinks that the dev environment looks exactly the same as the production environment, although the dev guy has been there for 10 years. But it's not, so they code it, they test it in dev, they move it in prod, and they tell it after the fact. And the prod ACLs are completely different. They block the application, we stop going that application into production. Deadlines are in line, and we have this sky falling down. So the after fact is really, it made us all probably be members of those, what do you call it, therapy group named DevOps, where you deal with all the pain that you've got of configuring all these different platforms to actually stitch it together and work it together. So after realizing the pain points, the people, processes, technology, everyone's aware of it, right? I mean, we couldn't throw more bodies because it's expensive to have a security analyst, especially one that does know what needs to be done. So we had to make us more efficient as a team. And when you talk about efficiency and modern development, you often hear that CI/CD acronyms. You hear automation, you hear orchestration. We had to actually get into all that DevOps practices just because, hate it or not, the dev teams are the ones that are the more efficient compared to the operations, compared to the security. They're the one that are using the tools in a way that they can spit out 1 million lines of code on a regular basis with testing involved at each step, right? We had to have a technology that supports that. That technology should be an API driven. It should be opened. You should be able to easily integrate with tools around it to build that ecosystem where it really provides you the capabilities of enforcing your security, to put the guardrails to make sure that you're like PCI driven or compliance, right? So that technology is obviously Palo Alto, in case you're questioning. Ready, set, continuous security. It sounds very easy. It's freaking hard. I have this story. We have this a senior developer. He's got a list of changes on a new application. Those are like new features and the patches of application that we have. Boiled down to his teammates, there are like 5 of them. Each one got the task. They worked on their laptops, coded, tested, works on the laptop, right? Integrated together. 3 of these failed. First 2 worked fine. Why? They started scrambling and everyone started questioning his work and his module. Ultimately they found one module that was breaking the rest. They fixed it. They packaged the release. They sent it to Ops. Ops couldn't make it. They scheduled production change in 3 weeks. At the time when they did, the release failed. Meantime, DevOps was on another cycle. They were actually doing something else. Nobody could help. Main factor in this was the testing. It's crucial to be able to test your changes, regardless whether they're dev changes, security changes. It doesn't really matter. In this case, testing could have prevented us from deploying application in production. And we follow the same dev methodology, which is test-driven. We should be able to prevent security changes put in production that it can eventually be a disaster for us. And that's what I call continuous security, where you are able to do, and you probably often hear that shift left, where you imply your security policy at the very beginning of the life cycle of your application, or shift right. But in reality, you have to do both. Because if you've got a gap in between, that's not continuous security. You've got a moment where you don't really know what's happening. What is your security posture with it? To accomplish that, you obviously have to have an orchestration, automation, and a playbook. So orchestration is pretty much where the rubber hits the road. It's pretty much your application of choice, and that could be Circle CI, can be Jenkins, can be Azure DevOps, that you use to create the infamous pipelines. The tasks that takes the code and puts them all the way into production. You have to be able to automate that, and to automate something, you have to have a template, right? They call it templates, they call them playbooks. It's pretty much a text file that describes your environment. That text file can be replicated easy and can be put in an automation using your orchestration. That leads us to the very concept of the CI/CD, which is a test-driven practices with a closed loop. Very important. They call it fail forward. Not sure why. Like, why would you forward if you know that you're going to fail? But the concept is that if you do your test on a regular basis and you find something wrong, then you can fail back very quickly. So the impact would be minimum. CI, straightforward, it's continuous integration. It's pretty much the practice that leads you to easy packaging your code. CDs stand for a continuous delivery. It's an extension to the CI, and what it does is the concept would be that it would take your code, it will prep it, and it would be ready for you to deploy to your users. The users can be your dev guys, your ops guys, different environments. CDO can also mean continuous deployment. It's pretty much a step further where the whole process is closed and your configuration change that you bear in your template is pushed all the way down to production without a human interaction. That process would only fail if a test fails. We as a company are at continuous delivery. So further down the slides, you're going to see like a few snippets. We push configuration down to Panorama, which is continuous delivery, and that push button we still do manually as a security admins. So we do not go yet to the continuous deployment. There's a few more tests that we need to ensure before actually pushing to the device group. So security as a code, back to the same concept. Once you've got to a stage where your configuration can be referred as a simple text file that is understandable to other teams, they can contribute to that code. You can really empower that DevOps mentality and do not need to be in a cone. So nobody knows how to use Panorama, nobody knows how to use PanOS without having some background. You dev guys don't know that, but they usually know what are the requirements. They know what's the source, what's the destination, the service, the app ID eventually, right? But knowing that, if you've got your security as a code, you can expose that to the dev guys. And the next time when they deploy an application in dev and they know the requirements, they can actually code it themselves. Your responsibility shifts from manually adding ACLs and taking your time for it to validating what needs to be added into Panorama, right? So this is what we call extensible function. Just that shared capabilities where other teams now can contribute to the security as a practice in general. Now we've got a few use cases, 4 of them. The first 2 do not require any coding skills. They're based on the SOAR as a concept. Those are based on features, cool features from Pan. Most of you are probably familiar with it, with the external dynamic list, auto-tagging, dynamic address groups, Wildfire, API, Cloud VM integration. The very first one is the external dynamic lists. So a request came to us to secure outbound access to O365. I'm like, how you secure something that those guys at Microsoft, they don't sleep, they change IPs constantly on a daily basis for the O365 services? You can't really do a static ACL. You have to automate it somehow. We did it with MindMelt. We've set up MindMelt. Fortunately, Microsoft provides a feed that you can piggyback and do a GET request and then parse the key values. Key values in this case are the IP addresses. Create an external dynamic list, put that in a security policy, and voila, we had that high five moment in a day of work. We've been able to actually secure the access using MindMeld. We soak it for a week in dev. It was just fine. It's like, let's go to production. In 3 days, that failed. It did bite us because what happened is, although we were all so religious on the CI/CD principles, we did not implement a test. So the miner failed. So there was no test to validate whether the miner is actually working. That's now 101. And then on top of it, when it failed, it decided that Microsoft has 0 IPs in O365, flushed our dynamic list, put nothing. Then as the security policy, we did not have a one below it that prevents eventually if the first one fails to allow any traffic. And the campus users got no YouTube. It's funny that the first thing that they realize is there's no YouTube. Eventually later it tricks down to them that the emails is not working. So we investigated. We found what's the problem. And now we have 2 mind melts with the CI/CD pipeline, and what it does is actually testing. So both mind melts are pointed to the same source. We do compare whether these two are equal, and then we update the external list. So out of that, do testings. Automation is easy when you use those tools, like probably you've been on any other sessions like Ansible and Terraform. Testing is very important, like, cause like you can very easily go to the Terraform website, download the module. They have even a template. You just copy paste, change the IP addresses. It's there. And it runs. But with no testing, it really bites you after that. The other one is the auto quarantine host. Piggybacks on the SOAR as a concept, right? Automation response. We wanted to be able, so what was the current state? The current state was that somebody would go to a Chinese website for some reasons, a file will be downloaded, what file will do something, it will come back that the file is malicious. We get it in the SIEM, but it's retroactive. It's passive. The SIEM does nothing. It just sends emails to our SecOps. They eventually react. They see, they investigate, and probably in 2 days that machine gets reimaged. 2 days. Somebody could have already done the control and command channel. So turns out Pablo has everything in this case. The workflow is, as I said, a user would download a file, and the wildfire will come back to us with malicious. That usually happens in 2 minutes, by the way. Wildfire is very quick on it. But what we have is we have a firewall rule with a forward profile on it, and we have the dynamic address group with a tag. So the way that works is that you can configure your Palo Alto at the time when the wildfire comes back to us saying that a malicious file has been identified, to tag the source IP. You can tag with anything. It's just a static tag. The point is that that static tag creates a dynamic address group which participates in a firewall ACL that denies complete access. So the workflow would be at the time when we get a response from wildfire, the source IP is tagged, moved into the address group, traffic is denied, help desk is notified right away, 2 minutes. They get to reimage the machine, and not only that, but it also has, the firewall has a built-in web page where the help desk can actually log in, put a static password that they only know, which will remove the source IP from the tagging. I don't need to do anything as a security analyst. It's all done by the help desk. I've done my job. I've automated based on a response from the wildfire. They can only need to take that laptop, reimage, go back, put the password, untag it. That user can continue working at the same day without losing any business time. A VM series deployment in Azure. That was like a fun. So I joined WestJet, and shortly after they said we're going to the cloud, like those guys that popped up their hands. And my manager came in and says, like, we got to deploy the VM series in Azure and secure all the workloads that those guys are start doing it, and they were very fast on it. So I was like, that might be easy, right? Went on Google. I'm like, in my head, it was like somebody must have already done that, right? There should be an ARM template for it, and there was. How many of you have a VM series in Azure? A lot. Look at that. So we went through the way that Palo Alto supports VM series. They have 2 different models. We've picked up a shared design. I downloaded the ARM template, pushed it. It asks you for some manual input, like the VM name, the type of license. all these like the resource group, the VNet, the subnet behind it, all that you have to put in. Then you push a button and actually download, like does the magic behind it and spits out that VM, but the VM is like by itself. There's nothing around it. You've got to have this sandwich between the balancers, like a public balancer, private balancer, and then you've got the VNet and the subnets. And the subnets, you've got to have a routing table to steer that traffic into the balancer, where the firewall is pretty much your backend member. All that is missing. So I started collecting ARM templates. I ended up with 10. I'm like, this is an automation. Push better. Like, I can deploy something probably in a half a day. And I did. Came back to the manager saying, it's done. Ready. 2 weeks from now, we enter a new region in Azure. I'm like, I've got everything there, right? Deployed it. The VM is not exactly the same because it's a bit of a different name. I just didn't remember 2 weeks ago how I named it. And then I didn't remember what was the static routes that I need to put in to steer that traffic back and forth between the balancers and then the express route out to the on-prem data center, right? It wasn't automation. It was like, probably where's the menu? It's like ARM templates would give me like a half step further. Came with the CI/CD pipeline. The first challenge for us was to pick up the tools that we want to use based on our requirements and success criteria, based on what Palo Alto supports as integration, as you all know now. By the end of the day, Terraform and Ansible is the choice of template or a playbook, how you provision. We currently use Visual, that was the old name, Visual Studio Team Service. Now it's called Azure DevOps. That's what we use for orchestration. This is where our pipelines are. It's the tool that configures the task required for me to provision our firewalls. Git is the repository. Why Terraform? I've seen now, or I've heard different statements. Why Terraform or why Ansible? I'll give you my perspective on it. Terraform, how many of you are familiar with Terraform? Few, more than before. Now, for those that don't know, Terraform has a state file. It's a declarative tool that you say that you need 5 firewalls, and if you've already got 3, it knows that it has to provision 2 more. It's not like Ansible, where you need to rerun it again to actually provision a new firewall. It's declarative, number 1. Number 2, it has a state file. It's a snapshot of your environment and fits very nicely to the logic where other teams can piggyback on your security as a code and withdraw information that they need. That state file contains pretty much everything. How many firewalls? The subnets, the VNet, the routing table. You're going to see in the next use case, the security ACLs are there. If a dev guy needs to know what his server subnet should be in, he can just go to the Terraform file. It's there. It's future-proof. If new development comes in, like in my operation world before, I had a network background. A vast majority of requests comes in from dev guys and from SecOps guys. What is this subnet? Where this? Like, those questions are already answered by the Terraform state file. So this is now in production for us. It piggybacks on the code. Oh, that's a future state, yeah. So back to the basics. We'd like to have that CI/CD pipeline have a shift left and shift right testing. The testing will be done by inspect profile based on CIS. The shift left for us means that before a firewall gets registered to the panorama, I need to actually know what's in panorama. Does my template carry on the configuration that I really need and I know? does the device group have the ACLs required for me for initial provisioning? This is the inspect row. And once I validate what's in Panorama at the end of the day when that new firewall gets registered and associated to the device group and a template associated to it, I would also validate once again between the process, if anything changed, I need to ensure again that that firewall has the configuration that I know it is in Panorama. The CI/CD is piggybacking on the code. We've variabilized pretty much everything. You can see from top to the bottom the name of the firewall, the number of the firewalls, the storage account that that firewall is using, the VNet name, the subnets, the nickname, the type of license that we use, everything. To us, takes about 10 minutes to deploy a new set of firewalls. So if I receive a request from our cloud architect that we are entering a new region into Azure, it takes us about 10 minutes to duplicate that file, change the key values for the variables that I have, which are not many, and not all of them will be changed. I'm not going to change the license type. We've got this huge license with Paolo. So I'm going to just change the subnets. But most importantly, Palo Alto supports us. They support a template variables. It's crucial for us. I have a single template that describes what is my firewall, looks from a network perspective, how many virtual routers it has, how many zones, how many routes, static routes or OSPF, or dynamic routes. Everything is described in a single template with variables, and those variables are piggybacking from my Terraform. I don't need to rewrite them here. Once done, that's all. Don't want to do copy-paste twice for the same thing. So when a firewall gets registered, it assumes that template, and the template through the Terraform, those variables will be substituted. So this, you see the key values, but if we enter a new environment, those values will change. Pretty easy. Pretty damn good though. The security policy deployment and dynamic updates, another integration that Palo Alto has with cloud providers. By the way, the use case that you guys saw, it's not only for Azure, it's for AWS as well. Exactly the same.
No GCP?
We don't use GCP, I don't know. It's like, you know, AWS, Azure, and GCP is the third. I find that a lot of tools, by the way, that kind of I see them supporting in the same format. They start with AWS, continue with Azure, and then wherever is left for GCP. Back to the SOAR concept, we want to have this closed loop. I want to know what's behind my firewall, because web servers go in, go out. Now they're talking about canary deployment. You guys are aware of canary type of deployment? So there's like pretty much the two main types of deployment is blue-green, where you have Apache servers running on version 1, for example, and then you decide that your service needs to run on version 2. You introduce a complete new cluster, and then you slowly move traffic to the new cluster, either through a DNS, Akamai, some sort of way. Just steering traffic, a load balancer if you want, right? Canary, you would introduce a new version within the same cluster and move a portion of that traffic to the new servers, right? It's easy. Back to this. So we wanted to do a closed loop. We wanted to make sure that that firewall knows what's behind it. Palo Alto does have an integration with cloud providers, Azure and AWS. I don't know about GCP. They have that plugin. It's based on Python script. It runs at minimum every 60 seconds. It's configured on Panorama. At the time of configuration, you provide obviously the credentials, in our case to the subscription. So it does have a service principal behind that is being used by the script. it pulls out from Azure. Where's my Azure? That's like the cloud. It pulls out back from Azure a key mapping. All the VMs, their private IPs, and the labels associated to those VMs at the time of deployment. And not only that, but also supports a custom user-defined labels, or they call them tags in Azure. So at the time of your deployment, if the VM actually carries on a tag, like application, environment, location, a role that actually does, I can piggyback on it. My Panorama can actually tell back the firewall. It can feed that very same firewall that governs my traffic from Azure, and the firewall all of a sudden would know what's behind it. Not only that, I'm going to go back after, but I can code now. That's a snippet that shows an ACL with the dynamic address group based on dynamically learned Azure tag. And I can use that dynamic address group into a simple ACL that allows inbound traffic on SSL. What happens is, my firewall knows at any point of time that I've got a booking web server row of, in this case, how many? 3, 6, 7 servers. If any of these servers gets decommissioned or a new server gets added, in 60 seconds my firewall will know, as long as the dev guy put a label on it. I do not need to update my ACLs anymore. They're label based. There's an overlay on top of my IP namespace in Azure. Not only that, but now back to the initial discussion, the dev guys can code. They can go and put that. I have it in a source code. They can clone it. They can work on it. They can do a pull request. My security team will just approve it. It would validate what's that code, because at this point, the security team and the dev team, they actually speak the same language. I know as a security guy, it's easy for me to read, right? You have the source zone, address, destination zone, destination address. I don't even need to remember my IPs anymore, because I'm looking and it says Azure Booking Web Server. I know what that is. I don't need to do FQDN or DNS resolution to understand the IP, right? Back to the concept, exposing the security as a service. So everyone in the company at some point starts sharing and contributing to the security posture for my company. Oh, so a future state, as some of you might know, Demisto is now part of Palo Alto. Has very cool integrations and playbooks that you can automate stuff. Our future state is that we want to have a level up. As being a PCI-driven company, we obviously have a service now. Everything has to be with the tickets. For us, it takes me about 5 minutes to actually create a ticket by clicking all the buttons around. The integration that we want to do is ServiceNow get a custom request with the fields required for me to create an ACL, and that includes the fields for the source and destination and service. Those 3 filled in by the requester, the owner of the application. If someone knows what are the requirements for the application, that's the owner, right? He's supposed to create a ticket for operations to actually do the change. Why don't I just use his knowledge through ServiceNow, use the Demisto, get the fields, and pop them into that code? At that time, the Demisto would only need to kick in the pipeline, which is pretty much the same with what you've seen in this previous slide. It doesn't change much. I still use Terraform. That code is a Terraform. I still use my DevOps, Azure DevOps. It's exactly the same. Which brings me back, I've on a few sessions today, and it's always the same question: where's your dark secrets? Nobody wants to see them, right? Well, that's the reason why we've selected DevOps. It has a very nice integration with Key Vault. Pretty much it's a native integration. I put in within DevOps a service principal that has access to the Key Vault. It draws down the key values which are required for me to provision and gives them to Terraform at the time of provisioning. I don't even know them. I don't even have access to the Key Vault. The only one that has access to Key Vault is the Azure DevOps. So the Misto, really great. We expect even more. But the first for us, in terms of security as a code and SOAR as a concept, extending it as a security orchestration, that's the use case that we're actually building on right now. More on that tomorrow. I was told that this is session number 3 in the ranking of the most popular sessions in Ignite 2019. A lot more details about the Misto and other SOAR key cases that we've got in production. Mike Busham is the one presenting over there, co-presenting with the Misto actually. And then we've got Gartner. It's a super session. I saw the room. It's probably 5 times like this one. I wasn't there actually presenting in that room. So these 2 are great sessions that are happening tomorrow, the first one, and then the day after is the Gartner session, and a bit more for the auto tagging. So to recap, Palo Alto supports us in both without knowing a code, acknowledge to achieve the concept of a SOAR just by using a built-in tools as far as you have a wildfire license and you know how to create a dynamic user groups. I think everyone knows that. And at the same time, with some coding skills, achieve even more and be able to provision and secure your cloud environment in a matter of day. Like, let's not put 30 minutes, but a day. I guess like a documentation is required. I think those guys that are actually doing IT documentation deserves a lot more. It takes a lot of time. That's it.